friends. It's almost midnight, and you found your way to the PikeCast. Come along as we careen through the catalog of the most formative horror writer of our young adult days, Christopher Pike. From adult perspectives, we'll revisit these YA books our parents probably would never have let us read had they known what lie inside. We tackle one book per episode in a freewheeling and unbiased chat. So grab your battered paperback, pull the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, climb under your bed covers, and devour a good book with us. Greetings, fellow Pikers, and welcome to the PikeCast. I'm Cooper Beckett, and I'm thrilled to be joined by my lovely co-hosts.
I'm Cassie. Hello.
I'm Becca. Hi.
And today we are talking about Christopher Pike's 1991 book, Die Softly. And we're going to be talking about it in great detail, spoiling each and every plot twist, so consider yourself thoroughly warned. I would also like to welcome our guest piker this week, Joe Lipset from the Horror Queers podcast. Welcome, Joe.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you here. I've been listening to Horror Queers for quite a while, and I really enjoy it.
Oh, thank you.
So I want to know, before we get into the podcast itself, how did you discover Pike?
Well, I can actually thank my love of horror to Christopher Pike. And
nice.
One of the things that I love to do is throw my sister under the bus because she was kind of like my gateway horror person. So my parents had a very strict, they didn't like my sister and I to watch television or watch movies for like a lengthy period during the late 80s. So my sister and I had to make ourselves do with reading a lot of books. And my sister is 3 years older than me, so she was constantly reading at a higher level. And I kept seeing these lurid, trashy YA horror books that she was reading, and I so desperately wanted to read them, and my parents forbid me to touch them. So I snuck into her room and just stole a couple of them, and of course they were all Christopher Pikes. Nice. And I got hooked. I gave myself nightmares. I was convinced that being a teenager meant doing drugs and having sex with everyone.
You mean taking cocaine?
Yes.
Not doing, taking.
And basically this kind of started me on my journey. Like eventually my sister would introduce me to Clive Barker and a bunch of other horror films. So Christopher Pike was very much my entry into all things horror, but also just it kind of anticipated where my interest would ultimately go, because I do host another podcast, which is all about young adult literature and their film and television adaptations. So Christopher Pike is kind of the intersection of both of those interests.
Absolutely. And what keeps you coming back? Like years later, you're still talking about Pike. You just had an article about him. What is it that you feel is his enduring quality?
Yeah, so I just wrote a piece for the latest issue of Grimm magazine, which is all about teenage horrors. And for me, Christopher Pike there's very much an element of nostalgia. And I know you folks talked about that on your kind of opening primer episode. And it's very true. I feel like if you read Pike during a certain section of your life, you would automatically be, I don't know, like you said, we're all Pikers. And it very much feels like people who read Pike and had that influence means that you will think fondly of these books. But I just find there's something strangely calming and very rewarding about revisiting them. So I try to read the Final Friends franchise every year, and I usually go back and reread a couple of the other kind of standalone books. But
nice.
I just really love Pike, and I think he's more emblematic of the best that this YA horror was doing back in the 90s. Like there was a ton of other ones that you could cover, but really for me, Pike is the best of them all.
Well, yeah, and he grew out of, the point horror where he started and then just became his own brand and his own type of YA horror, I think. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like he's so much more mature and risque than a lot of the other writers. And this sounds a little ridiculous when you're reading it in 2020, because some of the scares and the profanity and even, the quote unquote dirtiness of these books is going to feel a little bit juvenile. But back in the day, like, nobody else was doing this kind of stuff, at least not for this audience.
No, none. So I wanted to also mention, as host of the Horror Queers podcast, I'm sure our audience can guess that you are part of the LGBT community.
That is correct. Yes.
All three of us are. And so it's a really cool thing, I think, to revisit Pike, who was writing at a time when it was a really, really rough for the LGBT community. Not that it's any treat today. And revisit it in that vein and sort of see what's behind his words. I think we may be getting a little bit extra out of it. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, I mean, there's only a few interviews with the author himself. Like, he was a very private person. I mean, This is a nom de plume, so that's not his real name. But he's pretty much on the record as saying that he was trying to push the envelope with depictions of race and his depiction of female protagonists. And he doesn't really talk a ton about like queer characters, but they do sort of pop up a little bit more in the later books. Mm-hmm. But especially for this book, I have a queer reading for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Joe, tell us what your 3 favorite Pike books are, the standalones that are outside of the trilogies or any of the franchise series.
Okay. Yeah, this is honestly really tough because I know when you folks were like, hey, do you want to come on for this? And I said yes. And then I think I gave you pretty much the first 20 books that he wrote as options.
Which was very convenient for us. No, actually, because that just meant whichever one we want to start with.
Yeah, and I would love to hear the 3 of you talk about why you opted for Die Softly, because it's not the first film. It's not the most obvious book either. So
it was a real easy one because we all had it.
Okay, that does make sense. Yeah.
So we didn't have to wait for thrift books to deliver anything. We could just do it.
Yeah, because tragically, a lot of these are actually very difficult to track down now.
They are.
I used to scavenge used bookstores. But sorry, to come back to the question, 3 favorite standalones. So the first book that I ever read of his was Fall into Darkness. And that one, I think actually still really holds up, despite the fact that half of it is fully a court case, which is not the kind of thing you would expect in a YA novel of the time. It's also the only filmed adaptation. So if you ever want to cover that, it's that has to be your bread and butter.
Oh yeah, we're planning on it.
The other one that I really love is Scavenger Hunt. It's the one that gave me the worst nightmares as a teenager because I won't spoil it because I can't remember which of you is the Pike novice, but
Becca
I don't want to.
is our Pike newbie.
Yes.
Okay. So that one really scared me. I think it's got some of the most atmospheric imagery in it. And then one final one. Gosh, there's just so many good ones. I think Monster is the other really interesting one. Okay. It's the one I wish had been adapted into a movie because I think it would have been fantastic.
Yes, a good creature feature, I think.
Yes, yeah.
And, I was an independent filmmaker for a while. I grew up wanting to write movies, and I couldn't understand why nobody was adapting these.
Oh, I know.
And really the only notable YA horror adapted into a movie is I Know What You Did Last Summer. Mm-hmm. And that's barely an adaptation. And it was only done by a filmmaker who got famous for Scream and then wrote that. So I always had this fantasy of if I ever get famous, I'm going to adapt Whisper of Death.
Yes. That's a good one. Yeah.
That's my book. That's my Pike book. And it's really exciting that Mike Flanagan has taken the reins of the Midnight Club as a series and is planning to adapt other Pike books as part of that series.
Yeah, I remember when they announced that they were adapting they're doing a couple of films based on R.L. Stein's Fear Street books that are coming out. So those will be the first one, I think, to come out next year on Netflix. It'll be a race to see if it's Midnight Club or these Fear Street adaptations. But I'm hoping that this will herald the kind of reemergence and even republication of some of these books.
A Pike-assance, as you will.
I would love it.
I love it.
But they better use the original covers because those later covers are god awful.
Oh, they're hot garbage. They're so fucking ugly.
Okay, let's dig in to Die Softly. So every Pike book in the first 2 pages has this little excerpt from the book that is supposed to get you excited about the book. And I always found them very odd and amusing. So this is a picture of horror. Few lay people understood that a negative contained far more detail than a print could ever show. For most people, a negative was just a blur of lines and shadows. But as Herb bent over the negatives with his loupe in hand, he was in a position to see exactly what there was to see. Oh God! Herb almost fainted. And with that in our minds, we move into our first section called Remember Me. And Becca is going to give us the back of the book summary.
Yes. Okay. He might have photographed a murder. Herb just wanted to photograph the cheerleaders in the school showers. He planted his camera high in the corner where no one can see it, and rigged it to a special homemade timer. He did this Thursday night, and he hoped by Friday night to have an exciting reel of film to develop. But a girl dies Friday afternoon. On the surface, it appears to be nothing more than a tragic car accident. But when Herb finally does collect his roll of film, he develops a picture that shows a shadowy figure sneaking up on the girl who dies, sneaking up on her with a baseball bat. It makes Herb wonder if the girl is dead long before the car accident, but unfortunately for Herb, he doesn't wonder if the murderer knows he took the picture.
I mean, that's a funny, I didn't read the summary before I read the book again here, and it's not quite accurate, I don't think. Huh. Cassie, would you like to tell us what really happens in this book? So everybody in the home audience, spoilers are here right now. So if you don't want to read, if you want to read the book before you listen to the spoilers, turn it off and go read the book.
Yeah, I'm going to ruin it for you. So, all right. So we've got Herb, who is this 18-year-old guy. He's got basically 2 friends. He doesn't have a lot of people around him besides, those 2 friends and his mother. These 2 friends he's known for his whole life. It's a pretty small town. Everybody kind of knows everybody. And he's in high school. And the thing about Herb is that he's not very experienced with women at all. He doesn't have a lot of he doesn't talk to a lot of girls. He doesn't have a lot of friends that are, the stereotypically kind of pretty but nice cheerleader type. But there are a lot of girls like that at his school, and he likes to watch them. He's kind of a creep about it, actually.
He does.
Yeah, he's not my favorite person, but he's a little bit of a creep.
I called him proto-incel once I actually realized what the plot of this book was.
And that's so accurate because we kind of spend the whole book with him where he does this really gross thing of, as the back of the book says, putting a camera into a girl's locker room so that he can watch them take showers. And, that's really gross on its own. But I think that we kind of go along with him as a character in a way that makes him a little bit more relatable, so it's not gross. And in the way that we do that is he's not the one who actually makes the decision to put the cameras in the locker room. So he's actually kind of pressured into doing this from one of those 2 friends that he has that I mentioned earlier. So he does this, he puts the cameras in there, and instead of, all the boobies and butts and things he's hoping to see, he gets a little more than he bargains for, in that the girl that's the object of his affection that he's like totally in love with and obsessed with, this cheerleader, Alexa Close, is actually in the picture with a baseball bat sneaking up on her best friend.
So not a shadowy figure at all.
No, it's definitely not a shadowy figure. We can make out who it is. And Herb likes her, so he's kind of in denial. And he sees this picture. He doesn't really know what to make of it. He develops in his room because he's really big into photography. It's kind of his only big main hobby. So he's going through the development process. He's seeing these pictures and he's like, I don't really know what this is. I don't know what I'm looking at. Cut to the friend of his, Sammy, who's a girl. She is the one who pressured him into doing this. And suddenly she's calling him and saying, I think Alexa killed her friend. I think the reason that this girl is dead is because Alexa killed her. So we have, in just the first couple of chapters of this book, several characters dying. deaths mentioned from months before that we don't even get to kind of witness until much later. And at the heart of it all, it's kind of this gross guy that wants to see a bunch of girls naked.
But one specific girl
mostly, yeah. I think honestly, I think he's kind of into all of it. He's just kind of like, well, let me see what I can see. But yeah, he's definitely more focused on Alexa. And then
That's
kind
his
of
favorite
it's a lot of
fantasy.
It is.
That's
Alexa
like-
is his favorite
When he said that,
fantasy.
I'm like, do you mean a crush? Like, what are you talking about,
Yeah.
buddy?
Well, I wondered if he meant someone who didn't exist, because his favorite fantasy, I didn't know what that meant when I read
like
that.
she's
It
not
was
real,
very
like,
odd.
just like an idolized like sort of caricature that he's made up.
Oh, yeah. And that's what gets him into trouble, right? Is that he doesn't actually know anything about this girl. He just finds her attractive and then projects everything he wants into her.
Exactly.
He seems to do that with everybody, in fact, to project exactly what he expects of them into them.
And I think that kind of gets him into trouble in several parts of the story, not just with the photos and with Alexa. So, sorry, I got off track.
So bring us around to the end here. What are we talking for climax?
So toward the end, we kind of don't know who we can trust, because Herb really isn't a reliable narrator. He's not somebody that we can trust to be making good decisions about the people around him.
No.
He doesn't know what's going on, and he's like I said, he lacks experience with other people. So he's very impressionable. He's very gullible. He's very easily manipulated. And this kind of makes him a little bit more likable, or at least somebody that we don't hate the entire time after the beginning. And then we kind of circle around to an overall mystery of not just who killed the girl in the showers and why Alexa was there with the bat, but who killed the guy from months ago, that we start the story where somebody's already dead.
This is a very convoluted climax.
Okay.
Really, what it comes down to is his favorite fantasy is like a Black Widow kind of character.
Right. She's a murderer. She's been murdering people all along, and she's been manipulating him into helping her cover it up in a way.
Joyfully, too. Yeah.
Yes.
And in a shock to me, Herb doesn't make it out of the book.
Nope.
No, he doesn't.
It was funny because I remember very little of the plots of most of these books, but about halfway through this one, I remembered the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, it's that book.
It's iconic.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
There's very few that Pike actually kills off his protagonist. There's a couple where it's like they've been dead the whole time, and that's the twist. But a lot of the time it's like, oh, we'll kill a bunch of supporting characters, but almost never the main character.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that. So thank you, Cassie. I know it was very convoluted, and to give you that as your first plot summary, that you acquitted yourself well.
It was a test.
So we're going to move into our next section, the Midnight Club, where we're going to discuss the characters themselves. So let's talk about Herb.
Oh.
So I don't agree. Cooper, I won't agree with you that this is proto-incel. And partially that's because I think that's a very 2020 read onto like a 1991 book.
Oh, I will firmly agree with that. Absolutely.
But I think it's also because of what Cassie said, which is that Herb to me is more of a pathetic character. Like, he doesn't have the imagination and the desires of an incel because his goals are so low stakes. Like, this is a guy who literally just wants a picture. It's not like he thinks that he's owed sex with Alexa, although he would be happy to take it if the opportunity presents itself.
And it does.
Well, it sort of does. Like, I think one of the things that always struck me with this is I really related to Herb, and I didn't get the grossness of it. Like, when people, looking through some of the Goodreads now, the reviews of it, people are like, oh, he's a pervert. He's disgusting. And I'm like, he is the kind of person who has an active fantasy life, and he can't separate reality from fantasy. And I mean, I don't think that excuses his behavior. He knows what he's doing is wrong, but I think he also thinks that this is a victimless crime.
And so we don't get too far afield here. I remember very much being excited by Herb's plan to photograph the naked girls when I was 12 reading this. So I also identified with him. I feel like this book is a great introduction because a lot of his books have female protagonists.
Yeah.
And this was one that definitely pinged that very, very early sexuality radar in my head and made me feel things that I didn't quite understand, I think.
I would like to add on, like, as Joe mentioned, it's not excusable that he did that, obviously, but, like, while he's doing it, like, I don't know, like, I don't sympathize with him at all, kind of, maybe a little bit, like, he has that internal conflict, like, should I do it, should I not do it, and as Cassie mentioned, like, Sammy's, like, pushing him, like, to do it, and he is kind of a pathetic character, so he does it. So, I don't know, like, I kind of feel like he's forgivable in a way, like, in a small way, I guess. Like, he's still gross. I'm going to admit that.
He's still gross. I think I'm a little harsher on him. I think just because, so this is going to be one of the only instances where this is a book that I didn't read when I was younger. So I thought I had actually. So when we scheduled this one, I thought this was one that I'd read and I was like, cool, I'm going to revisit it.
You're like, oh, no problem.
No, I read it last night. I had not read this one. And reading it as an adult, I think makes me a little bit more judgmental. Yeah. And like, so I highlighted specific parts too, which I know we have a section to go over it, but just to focus on his character, I think that there was a sense that there was power that he got from putting the camera there and from that. So I think that Sammy was maybe a catalyst to doing it, but I think the ability to do it and the desire to do it was already a part of him. And he knew it was wrong. Like Becca said, he knew it was not a good thing to do. He didn't care. He knew it was taking advantage of the girls. He knew it was gross. But there's even a part where he says the decision was being made for him. So he's like, this isn't me anymore. This is somebody else doing this for me. And I just like Joe said, it's pathetic. It's so gross to me. Like, he's such a gross guy to me.
Yeah.
And he does, at one point, it's internal, but it's after talking to Alexa, he feels bad about taking advantage of her. It's like, good. You should, because that's the thing.
Yep.
Correct. Yes, her.
Something I enjoy, like, we talked about this kind of in our little, like, introduction, and you guys were talking about how, I believe you guys were talking about, if I'm making this up, I'm sorry. I feel like you guys were talking about how the characters were relatable. Like, they were real characters. Like, they felt like real people. So, like, the fact that Herb, like, later is like, this is wrong. Like, that really shows, because, like, if I do something wrong, the next day I'm going to be like, wow, I did something wrong, and I'm going to, like, reflect back on it, so I feel like that makes him, like, he had a conflict, and now he's got to work with it.
I've seen critiques of the book that the ending is too fantastical. Like, why does Herb put himself into this position? And I think it's actually a testament to what you've just described, which is that he feels like the only way he can make right all of the deaths that he's been partially responsible for is he's like, well, the cops won't be able to catch this girl because she's too savvy. So he feels like he has to martyr himself. And to me, that feels very much like, oh, this is me paying the penance for all of the things that I've done, which have gotten my friends killed.
He was like the ultimate sacrifice to the story.
Yeah.
And
also because
his
he wants
sacrifice,
to be the hero.
Yeah.
Because he's a fucking twerp.
He's going to be the posthumous hero. He's going to be the one that everybody talks about. Remember when Herb took down the psychotic ring of senior cheerleaders?
The Sugar Sisters.
Yeah, the Sugar Sisters, yes.
Which, I mean, that is such a cool name, though, by the way, too.
It really
is. The whole little thing. And then just when obviously it's a spoiler because we're on this podcast, but when they talk about how they put some of the cocaine in the cookies and stuff, too, and that how they tasted better to begin with and then stopped tasting as good. I loved all these little details that they had throughout the book.
Yeah. Let's talk Sammy.
Oh, Sammy.
And I don't want to wait for the
problematic section.
Well, I don't want to wait for the best and worst writing section because I need to highlight this. Sammy was also overweight.
Yes.
Yep.
She didn't have a body. Her body had her.
Right.
She could have been an attractive girl. Herb knew because he'd seen her baby pictures.
That is such a mess.
I mean, that's how we introduce this character.
And she's not supposed to be a bad character. She's supposed to be his best friend.
Yeah.
It's gross.
It is. It's rough. But it's very indicative of this type of book at that time. And I think Pike was pulling away from it, because if you look at the point horror, the good guys are pretty, or sometimes black widows.
Mm-hmm.
And the bad guys are often, the overweight or the different or the weird. So he may be playing with that.
Yeah, I think he definitely switches it up a bit in some of his books, where it's kind of like a red herring almost, where the one that you think is the one to be trusted and beautiful and that needs protecting is the one that's actually doing the damage.
Yeah. And this, to me, is also a testament to Herb's character. So this description isn't Pike. This is Sammy. This is the way that Herb sees Sammy. And it clearly demonstrates the sort of fictitious reality that Herb is living in, where if a girl is pretty, then she's a cheerleader and she's going to go to Los Angeles and become a star. And if she's ugly, then she's Sammy. She's going to stay in town and she doesn't care about her looks. So it's very much like a virgin horror kind of, or like a hag and like a beautiful ingenue kind of dichotomy. Yeah. But it's real rough. And I would argue also that I think this is our queer character. I've always read Sammy as a coded lesbian.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I could buy that.
Now, I should clarify. I see this as a coded lesbian through the eyes of a heterosexual man. So it's like, it's a woman who doesn't care about her appearance, who has like a bowl cut. She wears unflattering, baggy clothes and, doesn't try to make herself attractive to men.
A lot of flannel too, they mentioned.
Mm-hmm. But it was the early 90s. Everyone was wearing a lot of flannel, really.
That's fair. That's a totally fair point.
It was a great time.
It was. I miss it.
So let's move on to Theo. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So I just wanted to point out, when you guys were talking, the synopsis said that a shadowy figure was in the photograph. Were they talking about Sammy? Because remember, her reflection was in the mirror. So I feel like they were talking about her and Alexa.
Okay, they may be mentioning Sammy.
Because they mentioned the flannel reminded me.
I think it's because they said that it's in the back that it says that the shadowy figure is sneaking up with the bat.
Oh yeah, right.
I think in the picture the shadowy figure is just next to the doorway in the mirror reflection because she was watching them. So I think they're kind of, in my perspective, they were kind of trying to imply that Herb didn't know who it was, even though he did, but throughout, because he was just trying to tell himself that wasn't actually the girl he loved.
Okay. I see what
that was my interpretation. I could be totally wrong about that.
No, I think that's where I came down. Yeah.
And Cooper, you might have better insight into this as an actual author, but I've often wondered if it's ad copy people who are writing the backs.
Usually,
of these books.
Yeah. Usually. Oh. And because authors are usually very bad at writing the back of their books, which I can attest to, I struggle so much with writing the back copy of a book because you know what the book is about, but you can't figure out like what will get you interested. Read the book. Read the book, for fuck's sake.
Just read the book in big letters on the back cover.
Yeah, read it and you'll find out what it's about. It's about a guy taking pictures of naked cheerleaders. Come on, read it. And there's murder.
Yeah.
Cocaine.
So much murder and coke.
And cocaine.
Taking coke.
Yeah, taking coke.
They took it all over town.
Oh, 91, where cocaine was just widely available in this small town.
Guns, too. Not just cocaine, but guns.
Cocaine and guns. So again, speaking of guns, Theo Corbin.
Theo, I like Theo.
A gun over it. I mean, I like Theo. But isn't it weird that he has a gun over at their house and he just sleeps there on the couch randomly?
Yeah, he just falls asleep in people's houses that they don't know he's there. He goes driving around with a gun he forgot he had on his passenger seat. Like, what's happening, Theo?
It could be indicative of a bad family situation for Theo. That's and, a surrogate mother and Herb's mom. So absolutely, it struck me like I couldn't figure out what was happening at first. Like, wait a minute, he was shooting in the back? What was he shooting?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Theo with the gun, good friend, got his back. I like Theo.
I find Theo just to be a little underwritten. Like, all we get of him is that he's a little bit drunk, he's good with a gun, and then he shows up at a convenient moment.
Yeah. He's a good filler.
I find it frustrating, like, particularly in this book, there's maybe a few too many characters, and as a result, we don't get to spend as much time with all of them. So
there are definitely too many characters.
So all we know of Theo is just that he's very upset about what happened to his brother. And it's like, that's what you need to know, because that will inform the plot.
And moving on to plot, Alexa Close. Herb's favorite fantasy.
Oh, Alexa.
She's something.
She is a cheerleader, but the good kind. The kind who eats at McDonald's.
Right.
Did anyone else notice an awful lot of McDonald's in this book?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, more than any book I've ever read, I think, do people go to McDonald's.
It's like Mac and Me, but book form.
That should be on the cover. It's like Mac and Me, but book form.
With more cocaine.
Yeah, with more cocaine. So Alexa, we get this sort of idealized version of the cheerleader trope, in that she's sexy, but she's nice to him. She's part of the group, but she's still willing to go to McDonald's with me. And how do we feel about Alexa?
I love Alexa. I love a bad bitch, and Alexa's confidence throughout this entire book, like, she is a mastermind when it comes to pivoting and coming up with a plan B, C, and D, and just getting rid of people who get in her way.
And using absolutely everything in her arsenal to get it.
She was prepared.
Sorry.
She was, yeah.
She had like a rough life, and kind of, instead of deciding like, I'm going to escape this, or I'm going to be good despite this. I had a rough, like, I'm going to kill everybody who upsets me.
Yeah, she went all in, she really just ran with it.
You got to respect her goals, I guess.
Yeah.
She's very clearly a psychopath. And
yes.
I'll confess that rereading this as an adult, the sexual abuse of a minor was the part that didn't really sit super well, because it suggests that because she was sexually abused by her father, she might have become this. And the way she's written, I'm like, oh no, girl, you were always going to become this psychopath.
Yes.
Yeah. And she was the kind of person that sort of leaked her psycho all over her friends, because she made her friend. I would argue that she took over Lisa and turned her into what she is. She took over Steven and turned him into what he is.
And Roger.
And it's still insidious.
And Roger, the late Roger Corbin, Theo's brother.
She does it so quietly that nobody can see it. Nobody can pinpoint it. Nobody knows that it's happening while it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I will mention that I remember being very skeptical of her the entire time.
Oh, yeah.
Because here was this very sexy girl who was talking to the guy that I was identifying with and being real nice to him and wanting to hang out and giving him a kiss on the cheek. So it's like, she wants something. She couldn't just be nice. That's weird.
It's one of the most frustrating aspects of the book, is that you're just like, there is no reason for her to be spending time with you. She doesn't like you. She is manipulating you.
I was super suspicious of her the whole time. Like, I knew, but like Joe said, like, I loved her, man. She was a queen.
Mm-hmm.
There's that one part where like Herb sees her father in the wheelchair, and she's like, I gave him something that he'll remember for a long time. I'm like, yes, queen, like that is what's up. Like, thank you. I'm a fan.
So let's move on to a fairly underwritten jock character, Steven.
Ugh.
I love that he's just so bland. Like, he's there as a muscle that Alexa just, she has molded him into doing whatever she wants, and she sets him loose.
And his attack on Herb is great because he forgets to put his car in park. And the car just rolls away. I mean, it's such a weird, like, this book feels odd in every scene to me. Like, we go to a new scene and it's almost like it's a different book. It's constantly writhing. And I think that's what makes it so complicated and hard to describe, is because these scenes sometimes feel out of nowhere. Like when they're talking about throwing water balloons on the Porsche.
Mm-hmm. And then that becomes significant.
And then, now that was the one coincidence I couldn't get on board with.
One too many.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, why randomly is that? Why are they randomly it? That
also, how did they
sense.
not recognize her? Like, you saw her in the flash. Like, you've known this girl your whole life. Right. How did you not know that's her until the very end? What?
Although we have identified that Herb has a terrible memory because he doesn't remember that Alexa moved to town when they were in second grade. He only remembers her when she gets hot.
Oh, that's fair. That is true. Yeah.
True, yeah. Yeah, they really do go all in on Herb's memory. They talk about it a lot, like a surprising amount.
It almost uses photography as both a mechanism for voyeurism, but also as you can't trust what Herb is saying. You can only trust the photographs.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, he's very, very unreliable. Like, even in like seeing the conversations he has like on the phone with the policeman, like he switches his answers from one thing to the next. And when the police guy catches him on it, he's like, "No, you said this." And suddenly he's like, "I don't know. I don't know. Did I say that? I don't remember that. I don't think I said that." And it's like, what are you doing? I was there for it, bud.
You can bet he's writing it down.
I like when he gets off the phone and he's like, "Well, I've been lying for the past 2 days." And I'm like, yes. Yes, you have.
This is a nice mess I've gotten myself into here.
Time for me to, I guess, make up for it.
I do think that's one of the other elements that makes this book stand out a little bit more compared to some of the others is this is a book that takes place in about 30 hours. Like it starts on Thursday afternoon and wraps up on, well, I guess it's Saturday afternoon. So 48 hours. But like the characters are awake for all of Friday and into Saturday. So their memories are unreliable, and it ends up almost infecting you as a reader because you're just like, it's propulsive reading. Like by the time I got to the everything happening on the cliff edge where Sammy gets shot over and Steven gets shot, and you're just like, what is happening? What? Like the speed with which this is all going down is crazy.
Yeah. It reminds me of some of King's scenes where a lot of people get killed, you know, where he just, it's like suddenly time expands and this happens and then this happens and then this happens. And you're just sort of seeing it. Yeah. And that's some of the best I think Pike does here is he's just like, boom. Okay. Now we're doing this. Are you ready for it?
Yeah. And characters are not prepared, and therefore we are not prepared.
Right. Okay, Lisa, the cheerleader he doesn't like. and I think with good reason, because she is the bitch cheerleader.
Poor Lisa, though. She gets probably turned into a monster by the prettier cheerleader, and then she gets murdered. She does not have a good time. Like from my perspective, I can just imagine like she meets this pretty cheerleader who wants to be her friend, and she's like, "Whoa, the most popular girl wants to be my best friend. This is awesome." Then they start doing cocaine. Then they start getting into shenanigans. Start sleeping. Taking cocaine. Yeah, sorry. They don't do it. They take it, please.
They take it.
They certainly don't snort it.
They don't snort it. Because he's not going to tell you how to do cocaine.
No. You can't have that in a children's book. But then, you know, they're sharing boyfriends. They're sharing everything. They're sharing secrets and lives and drugs. And it's just the way she gets treated, like the way that she's very clearly like the bad one of the two of them for the entire book. And then by the end, you learn that she was probably manipulated just as much as Herb and just as much as anybody else. That was really powerful to me. I was like, oh, fuck, poor Lisa. I hated her. Now I feel bad.
It makes you feel bad as a reader.
Yeah.
I think because, again, like, I don't think we ever meet Lisa. We only get Lisa through Herb's interpretation as the victim of her ire, and then also through Alexa's perspective, which is like, I mean, clearly Alexa cannot be relied upon to tell the truth about Lisa because she was already done with her.
Mm-hmm. But according to this passage I've got here, Lisa had a way of making people feel obligated to her. Let's move on to Roger Corbin, our dead before the book starts character.
I think it's interesting that he is dead before the book starts, but then we get him very early on in that dream sequence.
Yes. Yeah. And it's supposed to be meaningful, but we don't know why yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's really a non-character, but he is the... It's an example of how manipulative Alexa could be, that she was able to turn into what seems like a good guy, Theo's brother, into this drug-running addict who's having
menage a trois and drug runs. And
yeah, but I didn't want to make the menage a trois thing seem bad, because I was actually impressed that they seemed to be legitimately polyamorous.
Yeah, they didn't seem like there were no. It didn't. I personally, I mean, obviously, I'm not, but I didn't take any negative connotations to it when they were even talking about it in the book.
No.
I think it's supposed to be, if I look at this through the lens of especially early 90s television, the people having the threesomes are the psychopaths.
It's very sensational. Like, yes. And I think because it's also teenagers, you're thinking, oh, this is unusual for teenage girls, because I think we're used to the cat fighting, right?
Right. Instead, they're sharing boyfriends and probably getting down together a little bit.
Sure.
It's very, very intriguing.
I think with Roger, too, it kind of shows how widespread Alexa's damage is going, because it went from just her and Lisa to her, Lisa and Roger, and then he dies, and then now that's affecting Theo, that's affecting other people, other families. Like, it's just spreading outward like a poison.
Yeah.
And that's really the catalyst for everything, because none of this would have gone down this way had Roger not died there. Been murdered. Been murdered.
Well, maybe. I mean, I think there's every indication that as long as Alexa was in town, some of these events, they might not have gone down in this order, and maybe not with these people. But I always take it that the insinuation is that this kind of trouble and violence will accompany wherever Alexa goes.
Yeah. Herb's mom, my only comment is she's 43, and that makes me sad because I'm 2 years younger than her. That's it. That's all I got.
But she's so kind.
Yeah.
She is. She is. I used to be the young people. I used to be younger than the protagonists. Now I'm almost as old as their parents.
It's the problem with reading books. We get older and they stay the same.
But yeah, she's very permissive. She's very kind. But ultimately, I think sometimes in these books, the parents exist only to go to another room.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they have to be gone to let things happen, although she is very excited that Alexa came over in the middle of the night to hang out in her son's bedroom with him.
Well, you got to be worried when your teenage son installs a dark room into his bedroom. You're like, oh God, please meet a girl. Please meet a boy.
Could you just be a little normal, please?
Yeah. I do think there's a weird insinuation in this book, and this is very apropos of the 90s, but there's every assumption made that because Herb had a loving mother, he has turned out okay, whereas Alexa has turned out to be a psychopath because she had a sexual abuser for her father. And then nobody else apparently has parents at all.
No, that's very true. Even the Corbins, and there's 2 of them in this book.
Yeah, like you suggested, Theo maybe has a bad home, but like, why is he just constantly over at Herb's house? Why is he allowed to get drunk all the time?
Yeah. Yeah, the casual beer drinking. It's just like, well, but isn't your boss around? Like, you're at work. It was weird. It was weird to me. I think we're rounding it out to our last real character, and I don't know that he's really a character, but Fitzsimmons, our cop, who half this story is told to.
Like, I liked him, but he had that one creepy line where he was like, I would want to see the pictures too, and I'm like, back up, dude.
Yes.
So,
That
but
part
he
was
seemed
so
kind.
gross.
When he does want Herb to survive this, like he is really trying in the end of their conversation, just come hang out with me so you don't get yourself murdered.
Right.
Please. But he is way too permissive as a cop, I think.
I think it's partially because he's trying to gain Herb's confidence, so he's acting like a colleague as opposed to a cop. So he's saying things that Herb wants to hear to try to get him to open up so that he will maybe come into the station and remove himself from danger. And then when he gets the sense that that's not going to work, that's when he gets a little harder at the end. He's like, no, really, just like, do you want me to come? I can be there in 30 minutes.
Right. And he didn't make it.
We'll say, does he ever show up?
No, he didn't make it.
Aw.
Herb died. There's a funeral. It was just like suddenly epilogue.
That's because Herb can't read the situation. He never understands what's going on. So he just assumes. It's like, dude, just say, yes, come. I'll expect you in 30 minutes.
Yes, exactly. The PikeCast has to take a quick break, but we will be right back. Friends, where else can you get this kind of programming than the PikeCast? Nowhere, that's where. But we're trying to keep the lights on here. If you like what you're hearing and want it to keep happening, jump over to our Patreon at thepikecast.com/Patreon and throw us a few bucks to join our private Discord server. Higher tiers get books, stickers, bookmarks, and even personalized shirts. That's thepikecast.com/Patreon.
Once, Osgood and Frost were the up-and-coming stars of the burgeoning paranormal investigation TV show craze before a hoax put an end to their friendship, partnership, and television careers. Now, over a decade later, Prudence Osgood is a barely functioning alcoholic ghost hunter for hire. Her yearning for mystery and adventure is reignited when she receives a cryptic, untraceable email. She can't resist embarking on an investigation that tugs threads, winding through a sinister series of disappearances, her former partner's family, and a night 20 years ago when a semi blew a yellow light and nearly killed her. Reviewers are calling Osgood Is Gone a masterfully vulnerable and relatable 21st century horror story, and a bourbon-soaked supernatural mystery with sparkling dialogue that sticks the landing on LGBT characters, and main character Prudence Osgood, as tortured as she is clever, broken in all the best ways, and a true heroine for our times. Buy it today at Osgood Is Gone as a paperback or ebook, and watch for the audiobook narrated by me, JJ Ranvier, this Halloween.
Stay tuned after today's episode for a special sneak peek of the Osgood As Gone audiobook. Hello, Pikers. Are you enjoying the PikeCast? Good. Do you have Pike books at home? If so, show us on social media using hashtag #ShowUsYourPike. Welcome back to the PikeCast, and we're moving into Spellbound, our spoiler-filled discussion of the book's plot. Yes, we've already talked about the plot a lot, but really what I want to know more than anything else is what intrigued you about this plot, and what did you find just like, well, that's stupid?
I mean, I liked the plot. I like that there's a bit of sort of suspense to it. I like that there's like this underlying mystery of, you know, death and scandal and something going on that you're not quite aware of. I think, like Joe had mentioned about some of the characters, I think there were some parts of the plot that were too convenient or too, it was like these little puzzle pieces that they needed to make other puzzle pieces around them fit. And that they didn't necessarily like Theo just driving up suddenly with a gun to shoot and save
Right.
Herb from Steven. It just little things like that where like you have to suspend your disbelief, and if you can do that, it's an enjoyable ride. But there are a lot of moments like where you have to do that in order for it to be enjoyable, I think. Which I enjoyed it. I had fun, but I'm also very used to Christopher Pike's books.
And how about you, Becca, for a first time Pike? Like this is their very first Pike.
I know.
Did it actually make you want to read more?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So I'm gonna be honest. Like before I read this book, I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna hate it, and my co-hosts are gonna hate me. Like this is gonna suck. But I got into it, and I felt like, yeah, there are some elements of it that's kind of like cheesy, but as I read a lot of YA to begin with, and I feel like it holds up pretty well. Like, yeah, again, cheesy sometimes, but I don't know, I was into it, and I was really enjoying it. The whole time, I was actually thinking of Scream the entire time, because you have, like, these problems, and then at the very end, that climax was so long, and then after people die on the cliff, we have Alexa seducing Herb, and I just started thinking about like Billy Loomis for some reason, because he tells him Alexa, she tells Herb everything, like step by step, like this is what happened, and it reminded me so much of Billy Loomis explaining to Sidney Prescott, like, this is what I did, buddy, this is what I did. And I don't know, like, I love Scream, so
actually, yeah, you got Billy. Billy kind of took Stu and made him into. Oh, that's interesting.
I was loving the Scream vibes I was getting.
That's a really good comparison. I really like that. I didn't pick up on it while I was reading, but now in retrospect, I can definitely see that.
I was like, I don't know if anyone else is gonna think this.
Well, and we know Kevin Williamson is a fan of Christopher Pike, nice. So maybe he was inspired.
Nice, yeah, I liked it. I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I want to talk briefly about the very odd structure of this book.
Oh, the framing device, you mean?
Yeah. So we open with a dream.
Right.
Then he wakes up and begins a conversation with a police officer about the first 2/3 of the plot.
Mm-hmm.
And then he stops talking to the police officer and then climax. So it's a really just an odd framing thing, I thought.
Yeah, this is a little unconventional for Pike. He tends to favor one or the other. So he'll open with a dream that portends, he'll open with a dream that portends basically what's going to happen throughout the rest of the book, or like some kind of ominous warning. Or he'll do the in medias res, like, okay, we're at the end, and then we're going to jump back and give you the catch up all the way until we get back to the climax.
Well, he had too great an idea for a dream, this Grim Reaper and the White Horse and the skeletons in the desert. And that was a good, I roll my eyes at opening with a dream because I read too many Dan Brown books, which all bizarrely open with a dream sequence.
Right.
And so when that started, it's just like, oh, okay, we're doing this. But the idea of them all out in this Western town and taking their gloves off to see if there's skeletons underneath, it's sort of like a visceral horror that really reminds me, like the only Pike book I remember from start to finish is Whisper of Death. Right. And it has that same vibe here, is that it's that desolate dread.
Yeah. You'll see it again when you folks jump back to Scavenger Hunt from a couple years before. Right. And then he does it again, actually, in the very next book, Bury Me Deep, where she...
Oh, really?
Yeah. Bury Me Deep is one of my favorites. I love that one so much, and I'm so excited. I don't think we have that one even scheduled, but I want to get to that book.
Absolutely.
Who doesn't love a book that's about homicidal scuba diving? Come on.
Yes, and he combines. I'm not going to go too much into it, but it's got like ghosts, scuba, Hawaii. Like you go on vacation. It's got so much. I love it.
I'm loving it already.
It's very different from a lot of other Pike books because most of Pike's books take place in small town America, like Midwest. Yeah. So, like, that's the only one that's ever set on vacation.
Oh, The Immortal.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah. So those are two of my favorites for that reason. So I think it's interesting too, because with this one, we spend a lot of the time, like you mentioned, talking to the police officer on the phone. And this isn't the only one of Pike's books that, you know, that deal with most of it being in an interrogation or like Fall into Darkness with a courtroom. But like Execution of Innocence, I think it's called. That one is also largely told kind of in, like, it's not a linear storyline, and they're giving the information to the police, and the police are trying to figure out what happened with these dead kids.
Same with Give Me a Kiss.
Yes. And I love that. I love that that Pike isn't really focused. He's not like, here's all this sci-fi or here are all these creatures. Like, I'm going to give you a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Maybe I'll have some ghosts sprinkled in, you know, like it's so varied. And I've said this before, but I'm so glad we're doing this podcast because I'm so excited for these books.
Yeah. Me too. Becca, this is going to be really interesting for you because like, you're going to think that you've figured out how Pike writes. And then it'll be basically what Cassie just said, where it's like, okay, so is this a supernatural one? Yes or no? And then like your diagram splits, and then it's like, okay, is it ghosts? Is it immortal beings returned from like the past or the future? Like,
is it dinosaurs? I seem to remember.
I'm so excited.
You're in for a treat.
Yeah.
I don't know where this would go, but in the book's plot, I don't know if it fits in plot, but I really need to talk about it. I'm a photographer, and never in anything I've ever read except photography manuals have I had people go into such detail about how photography works and how you print photos.
So I was going to ask if it was accurate.
I think, so for a year I took office psychology and I went to photography, and I was really happy to see him go so deep into it, to be honest. Like, it was lengthy explanation, but I'm like, yeah, I'm here for it the whole entire time. He's like, this is what you do next. This is the developer. I was here for it, Cooper. I don't know about you.
Well, no, there's Francis Ford Coppola, the director of The Godfather, once said, I'm going to put a recipe in every movie. That way, if you don't like the movie, at least you got a recipe out of it.
I love that.
And so in The Godfather, one of the characters teaches you how to make spaghetti sauce. And so Die Softly teaches you in shocking detail how to develop film.
I was so excited about it. And then when Alexa shows up, I was like, is he actually going to explain this all over again? Like, I really thought he was going to tell her every step of the way. And I'm like, I liked it the first time, but like, do we have to do it again?
Yeah, I don't want to hear it again.
I like that Alexa comes in.
Funny too that he spent so much time talking about the development process, and then it's like, so how did I set up the timer? I just fuse the camera to the VCR, right, exactly. And you're like, I don't think that's a thing.
Well, I having had those old VCRs where you actually have to turn the dial for time, I think that might work, but I'm not sure.
I've never heard of using a VCR to take pictures like that, and so the whole time I'm reading this and I'm like, is this a thing or am I just a fool?
I would tell you it's not a thing.
But it's possible.
But maybe you could do it. No one has ever done it, I don't think. But maybe possibly you could.
It probably gave some ideas to some teenage boys in the 90s who tried to steal their parents' VCR and take it to school.
Possibly one of my favorite Pike conventions is like the just crazy convenient like locations for something to happen. Like in this case, I'm so glad that there used to be that air conditioning unit that had the giant platform that I could like hop, skip, and jump and put a VCR onto. And you're just like, I love you, Christopher Pike.
And even so, I could not for the life of me figure out how he hid a camera up there.
No.
Because it has to be close enough to actually have the lens pointing at the people. So how do you actually hide that? It didn't make any sense to me.
And even how did he angle it? Like, presumably the shelf was... anyway, the logistics are not like, you got to let it go.
We're supposed to just go... and wasn't he worried about the lens fogging up? Because I would be. As a photographer...
With the hot water, that's a good point.
Yeah, I'm concerned about foggy lens.
Look, he had one thing on his mind, Cooper. Well, he had a couple of things on his mind. And
Was that a tit joke, Cassie?
It was. It was just a poorly done.
No, it was good. I liked it.
No, it was good.
Can we put a laugh track right here in the podcast?
Yes. I thought it was interesting because going back to the photography part, because I've never developed any photos or anything like that. So I didn't know a lot of what he was talking about. And I read it all and I was like, oh, this is cool. I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm going to, read it. Mm-hmm. When Alexa comes into his room the next day or like a couple hours later or whatever, and she's like, oh, it smells like vinegar in here. I thought that was really a nice touch because as somebody who doesn't know anything about photography or developing, like you would walk into a room, you might smell that and be like, yeah, ew, what is this? And I just like that they had both. Pike, it seems like Pike probably has some experience developing photos.
Without knowing anything really about him, I can tell he's developed pictures.
And I love that.
But when I read that, it's like, well, somebody's a photographer.
Yeah. It's actually one of the fun things because nobody knew who he was and he was so inherently private. It's fun to do the deep dive into each book where you're like, okay, so what is the factual thing that he is including about himself in this book that will give us a clue as to who he is in real life? It's like the name Anne,
the name Anne is in every book almost, I think. Maybe not in this one.
Not in this one. I think one of the things that I find really fascinating, and it never occurred to me when I first read this or even in subsequent readings, but upon this revisiting, when I saw that this was published in 91, and this is basically about a small town that's being corrupted, but secretly, and the teenagers are up to no good, and the parents don't seem to know, and there's a secret drug running organization. This is all taking place a year after Twin Peaks debuted.
Oh my God, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, that's true.
It just kind of struck me as the small town with secrets. That must have been hugely influential.
I mean, that influenced everything on TV for the next 3-4 years, at least.
But Laura Palmer had this very public appearance of being such a sweet, nice girl to most people. And then she had this secret seedy underbelly to her life, a lot like Alexa, which I didn't think about that comparison, but that's a really good one.
And Lisa's the one that shows up dead early on in the story.
Right.
So, and not wrapped in plastic because that would be too on the nose. But okay, shall we get to the eternal enemy? Our thoughts on the antagonist, which is Alexa is the antagonist of the book.
Actually, I think drugs are the antagonists.
Yeah, cocaine.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Yes, okay, drugs are the antagonist. And don't let someone put drugs under your nose when you have tape on your mouth. That's a good lesson.
I just love everything about the end of this book because not only do we get Alexa delivering this fantastic villain monologue, but then it is the most insidious way to kill someone.
It really is.
And I love that she thinks that she could get away with this because he would have rope marks all over his arms and feet. And but sure, Alexa, just cover him in tape and force him to snort strychnine.
I mean, the other ones went over the cliff, so okay, I get that. But yeah, there's no way. This is someone who's really, really high on, among other things, her own power at this point. She can do anything, and no one can fucking stop her. And it's why I like the sort of background scene at the funeral. It's that. There'd be music playing here. There'd be a popular song playing. Maybe Bittersweet Symphony. I don't know. While she gets shown the pictures of her murdering this guy.
Give it that Cruel Intentions treatment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Very 90s.
So it sounds like we're all aboard this is a good enemy. She's a strong villain. She's a strong character. And she really comes to life in the story.
And I think the fact that we gave her the backstory of her father really added to making her such a, I guess, developed character in such a short book.
Yeah.
This book is only like
And he
200
gets to
pages.
just live there and still watch her do all these things.
Right. And can't do nothing about it.
The
I think
passive
it gave him
observer.
something that he'll remember.
I had a lot of respect for her, but then that ending, like, what did you expect would happen there, girl? Like, how did you think you would pull that off? Like, all of the diabolical, like, manipulation and the smart, intelligent, like, little sinister things she did to kind of choreograph everything else that happened, all for her to be caught over something that, like, of course you got caught doing that, girl. What are you doing? But I mean, I do agree with everything else you guys are saying, though. She was very strong. She's powerful. Girl's gonna do what she wants, kill who she wants, take whatever cocaine she wants.
So powerful that Amazon named a device after her.
That's a damn queen right there.
It's unfair to you folks, but I'm comparing her to some of the other Pike villains, and I don't think she's the worst of them all. I do think that she's quite memorable. Like, when you talk to people who have read a lot of Pike, if you mention Die Softly, people will always talk about the end of this book and how she kills someone by forcing them to basically kill themselves with cocaine. Like, that is
eventually
memorable.
You're going to have to breathe.
Yeah.
Eventually.
That is cruel.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. And this is a book with no supernatural elements at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it is purely the evil that humans are capable of.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on. Our next topic is thirst, titillation, and sexuality in Pike's world. Have you noticed he doesn't actually talk a lot about the sex?
Nah.
He talks a lot about some things, but their sex is just there. It's their sex.
I think one of the things I like about this is that it's very frank in the acknowledgement that people want sex and are having sex, but it's not exploitative. Like,
true, yeah.
He doesn't need to titillate you, aside from the mention of, like, oh, Lisa looked really good in that position in the photo. And you're just like, okay, creeper. Oh, Herb, you're such a pervert.
I am very curious from our female point of view here, how the sexuality and titillation struck the two of you.
I think it seemed fairly typical from being a story told from primarily a teenage boy's perspective, that the things that he's focused on are, you know, the way the girl looks, her legs, how tan and long her beautiful legs look, and like all these like little things. His whole world is focused on girls and like seeing these girls without their clothes on and getting to bed these girls. And I think that kind of works to his disadvantage, because that desire for something that he's never experienced, and for the experience of just sex in general, it's what undoes him, because it's what blinds him to everything else, and it's what leads to his death. So I love that it's used like that, as like this, and it's done like that in horror a lot. It's like, you have sex, now you're gonna die, like that. The person who's a virgin is usually the one to survive. It's a trope, and I think he kind of played with that in this one, which I liked a lot.
But I like that in this case, it's not if you have sex, you're going to die. It's that you can't just be thinking about sex. Like, if Herb had kept his wits about him and acknowledged, I think she's sexy, she's also a murderess, he probably would have been fine. And instead, he just lets little Herb do too much of the thinking.
Well, and not only that, but he goes all in. Like, I have a passage here that Herb felt a soft, warm glow emanating from his chest. He wondered if he was falling in love.
God.
Like, I know, just eye roll.
It's like, okay, Herb. Okay.
Poor Herb.
You're infatuated.
Yes,
You're not in love.
Hot girl talking to you. Yeah.
He hung out with her for like literally 2 days, and like, he kept telling the cop, like, hey, she could have never done this. And it's like, you barely even know her.
Yeah. He clearly know nothing about her.
And he was so focused, too, on just, like, I remember that I don't have it highlighted, actually, but there was a part where she's eating, probably McDonald's again, and she's, it's talking about how her mouth is full, but her like, full lips, somehow, like, it was sexy, because her mouth...
I have that.
I was like, that's not sexy. Have you seen a woman eat? Have you seen anybody eat? Like...
She looked very sexy as she chewed with a full mouth.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That made me laugh. I was like, Herb,
Yeah.
who are you? Get out of here.
Like, understandable when you're talking about her drinking a strawberry milkshake. Sure, because
Yeah.
then you've got a
Fine.
straw and there's lip sucking and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
crap,
if she's
but,
got a banana, I don't know,
like, at one point, she's just eating a monster sandwich. You're like, Herb, there's nothing sexy about that. She's just eating.
I don't know. I find a woman eating a giant cheeseburger very sexy, actually. But it's more that she's eating a giant cheeseburger, which is awesome.
It's not like, look at all that masticated food.
No.
in her mouth.
I'm not turned on by the physical act of eating the cheeseburger.
Uh-oh,
But I think
Cooper's fetish is coming out.
Oh no!
Sorry, I didn't mean to put
Have
you
I
on blast.
possibly revealed something here than more than I already have elsewhere? Oh my.
Probably not.
Now on to Die Softly, the title of the section named after the book that we're reading this week, where we discuss some of the more problematic elements to the writing or plot.
I feel like we focused a lot on like what I found problematic, which would be like the fat shaming of Sammy.
Sure.
Yeah.
We do acknowledge that this was written at a different time and that this was written in a different way because he was writing for a machine of a publisher at this point,
Oh, yeah.
and he was writing to what they wanted him to write. So with that said, yeah, this is problematic. Yeah, it is rough that the hero basically is fat shaming and exploiting the people around him.
Yeah.
How about you, Cassie? I know you said you had a few things on your problematic chart.
Yeah, so there, I mean, we've kind of really touched on all of them. Like there was the fat shaming, especially the part how he was like somewhere inside, hidden beneath the rolls of fat
Yeah.
was the real Sammy. That was like,
Yep.
what the fuck? Like,
Right.
what does that mean exactly? Like, yeah. So that, I mean, and again, that's not me blaming Pike. That's not me saying Pike shares these views. I don't know him personally, so I'm not trying to hate on him or anything, but I do get, for the times that this book was written and the character, I think it's a believable thought for the main character to have had and for his way of thinking to have been, which it's not good, but it's understandable for what it is.
And it does really reinforce that he isn't a great guy,
Yes.
that he isn't a great judge of character.
Yeah.
And that's really part of his character. So if you look at it that way, that's not Pike saying that. That's him saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think between that and just, I think it was Joe actually, he had mentioned that the police officer, he was kind of trying to appeal to Herb in the very beginning. So one of my problematic things that I actually had highlighted, I think Becca mentioned, was that where they're talking and Herb is explaining to the police officer what happened. And the police guy's like, I can understand why any teenage boy would take photos of a bunch of naked cheerleaders. Hell, I'd probably look at them myself. And I was like, dude, this is a grown ass man. And these girls are like 15. Like, ew. And I will say, though, with Joe's perspective being that maybe he was just trying to buddy up and appeal to a creep, that makes way more sense for me.
It's kind of like everybody likes sexy cheerleaders. I mean, come on.
And I've seen
you
it in
didn't
Law and
want to
Order
kill
and
them.
stuff. Right.
You just wanted to photograph them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so those are the two things that stood out. And I think it's cool, too, that we're having this discussion because I didn't think about it from the buddy cop type of perspective. I was just like, ew, gross guy, but I like that. I like that we're getting into it. It's a new perspective for me to have on it.
How about you, Joe? Anything strike you as problematic?
Not so much problematic as from like a technical writing standpoint. I did find that particularly as we get towards the end of the book when things should be like coming to a close, there was like some of the editing was a little too lax for me, particularly in the end of like Fitzsimmons' conversation with Herb, where you're just like, get to it. Like, it just needed, I think, a tighter hand in the editing in some parts because some of the conversations are very circular and almost redundant at times. Yeah.
I do wonder if part of that is just young adult writing because there is a lot of that circular, okay, remember, this is what happened.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, I noticed that sometimes I noticed that in young adult writing in general. So I don't know if that's a a stylistic choice, or if you're right, Joe, that it's just he was stampeding toward an end, and that end was going to happen.
It's true. I just don't think that this is like the most tightly written Pike book that you'll come across. It's maybe reflective of some of the ones where he was producing 2 books a year. And again, in some of those interviews, you can find where he'll talk about, he was freaking exhausted. And he admits that some of these books are not as well written as others.
And one of them, I think he said he rewrote basically as another book.
Yes. Well, I'm not going to lie. I'm very interested to see what kinds of conversations you have when you get to Master of Murder, because Master of Murder is a more polished version of this book from my point of view. Ooh. It's almost identical.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, let's move on to the Season of Passage, where we discuss the best writing and the worst writing we found in this book.
Ooh, I have... there was only really one thing that I highlighted that I liked. That was just like a line from it. And it's not like fancy or anything, but so it was toward the end. He was talking with Steve, and there was like a bunch of shit happening. It was when like all the stuff was hitting the fan. And there was part of it where it said, where he was thrown down again, it felt like another dimension where people looked the same, but acted differently, where blood stained the ground and no one seemed to mind. But before he could walk over the blood, he had to watch it fall. And I thought that was such like wow. Like a lot of it,
that's a nice passage.
I really like that. I really liked it.
Mine is my first one here is because it feels like a hard-boiled detective novel. She had snorted 1 gram of cocaine too many and burned out the inside of her skull before she drove off the face of a wicked cliff and caught on fire at the bottom.
Yeah.
I love that.
I did that. Yeah.
That's a very film noir, right?
Yeah.
You're
not getting like, this is cueing you towards film noir, which means you should be looking for the femme fatale.
Yes, exactly. How about you, Becca? You got anything?
So I don't know if you want to put this in good or bad writing, but there's this line that I really enjoyed, like I laughed a bit at, which was like, his blood was hot, his thoughts were naughty. And I'm like, all right, that's golden. That's golden writing.
That's not only a good line, that is cover text.
Right, that really had me cackling, I tell you.
So I've got Herb chewed on the whole of his life for a moment. I like that.
I like that.
And the moon had finally risen, a dull yellow quarter crescent. It hung above the dark hills like an artist's tired afterthought.
I really enjoy how you guys have such good lines, and I'm like, his thoughts are naughty.
Hey, your line is great.
That's pretty golden.
Becca, yours is the only one going on the cover of a book. I mean, come on. That could be the tagline for this episode, for fuck's sake.
It really should be, honestly.
It should be. And then I have one last one in the good stuff section. What are you doing? Loading your ammunition? Cameras only fire blanks. You should know that by now. And that's a thought from her. That's
The other one that I have, it's not even like a full line, but like I told you guys, I really like when they do the thing where they say the title. So when Alexa says, just be easy and I'll let you die softly, she promised. I was like, yes, she said it. I was so happy.
It's like that Leo DiCaprio meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like, yeah, I get that. Yeah. Die softly. Look what you did.
Yep. That was me.
I'm always a fan of when that happens.
I told you guys I'm going to look out for it every time we read a book now.
Because some of these titles sound almost a little bit like Bond titles, right? Like you could imagine like the 25th Bond movie being Die Softly.
Yeah.
Or like Execution of Innocence.
Execution of Innocence. Yeah, that's a great one. It's not a good or bad thing. This was just interesting to me. Herb swallowed. The lump was back in his throat. The damn lump. He should have it operated on. It might be cancer. It might be something worse. Like randomly, in the middle of the story, suddenly we're worried about cancer.
That sounds like my anxiety talking, I tell you.
Mine too. So
I would think about.
It was just like, whoa, Herb, calm down. It's not cancer. For fuck's sake.
He's such an anxious guy, right?
He is. He really is.
I just have some stuff highlighted that's like more it's more along with the problematic stuff. Like, despite all his guilt about taking advantage of Alexa, he really wanted the pictures. Like, just stuff that drives home his character and that he knows it's wrong and is doing it anyway.
Yeah.
I found a line that would never, ever, ever make it to print today. I could have given him a machine gun and told him to go down to the mall in Parvo and take out as many people as he could, and he would have done it.
I was quite shocked with that one.
Yeah, whoa!
But it also just speaks to how little Alexa cares about people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, how dare you even say something like that?
Yeah. That is a rough line. For many reasons, but a rough line. Man.
She's a sociopath.
It won't be the first or the last time that there's like a massive school incident in these books, though. Like, thinking a monster.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Now we come to last act. Our final thoughts and our rating out of 5 pikes. So who would like to go first with their final thoughts?
Are we giving half pikes?
You can give a half pike. Okay. Or you can throw a head on the pike if you want to give it a little extra, a little oomph.
Okay, so I will give this one. So I will say as well that I have a lot of his other books to compare this one to. So this isn't my favorite of his works, but it's also not the worst one that I've read or the one that I liked the least. So I think I'm going to give it 3.5 pikes or 3.5 heads, 3 pikes and then 1 head on a pike.
3 pikes and then jam a head down there.
Yeah, just jam that. Yeah. And that's not to say, 3 is just the basic middle line. So I will say that I liked this one. I liked that it was like really involved and that you kind of weren't sure. And I like that they kind of flipped the script on a couple of the different things that you're not expecting. That said, I think he does it maybe a little bit better in some of his other books. So it's kind of in the middle of the line for me.
How about you, Joe?
I'm probably going to give this one a 4 impaled Sammys.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no.
Poor Sammy.
So cruel. It's like as if that character hasn't been hurt enough. That end is mean.
It was rough.
That end is mean, yeah.
The blood drops.
I think kind of like what Cassie said, I really appreciate how this book flips the scripts on certain things that you expect. And I also think it's really tried and true Pike. Like, you're going to see a lot of similar thematics. You're going to see a lot of similar characters. This is quite representative of what he's going to deliver, particularly in the non-supernatural books. And I found that this was like more or less a good reread apart from the fat phobia stuff. I think it's enjoyable.
How about you, Becca?
I am going to go with 3.5 also, 3.5 pikes. I enjoy, like this, like I said, never read this before. You guys know that. It was enjoyable. Like, I was turning pages nonstop, wanting to know what was happening. Yeah, there were some issues with it, like the fat shaming and all that. But I enjoyed it, and we had a badass woman, and we love those, so we love to see it. So, all in all, like, I feel like Alexa made this book for me. So I'm going to go with 3.5 pikes.
Specifically, she's throwing out 3.5 for Alexa.
Yes.
I'm going to go.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I'm going to go along with Joe and give it a 4. This, for a book that I couldn't really remember, this one got me back to where I was, sitting probably on my bed in my room at my parents' house with a flashlight under the covers, reading. And it really just took me away again to the world of Christopher Pike. And reading this made me so happy that we're doing this podcast, because it was like, oh yeah, this is my jam. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, Joe, thank you so much for being our very, very first guest on the PikeCast.
I'm so honored. Thank you for inviting me.
We are really happy you could come. And why don't you tell our listeners where they can find more of you and your podcast and everything?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I do have a couple of different podcasts. The easiest way to keep track of what I'm doing is follow me on Twitter or Instagram. And my handle is at @BStoleMyRemote. And that's the letter B.
And Cassie, where can we find you online?
My blog is letsgetgalactic.com, and my Etsy shop is letsgetgalacticart.etsy.com. And then you can find me on Twitter at Control-Alt-Cassie, so TTRLALT Cassie, and on Instagram at hollow.reader, HOLO.reader.
Becca, how about you?
My blog is astoldbybex.wordpress.com. My Twitter is also astoldbybex, and my Instagram is readwithbex.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Cooper S. Beckett. My website is coopersbeckett.com, where you can buy my books, including Osgood is Gone, my book that was very much inspired by my love of this kind of story. Audiobook is coming soon. Yay.
Ooh.
Woo!
So, Cassie, take us away with where you can find our podcast on social media and stuff.
Yeah, so we made it easy for everybody. You guys can find us at the PikeCast on all social media. You can also go to thepikecast.com and you'll have access to our merch store. You'll be able to find links to our Spotify and our Apple, and you'll be able to find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we share lots and lots of cool photos and lots of our stuff. So you'll get to see it and you'll get to know us a little bit more behind the scenes.
And we are doing this for the love of Pike, yes, but podcasts do get expensive. So if you want to support us, you can do so on Patreon, and you can get to our Patreon at thepikecast.com/Patreon. And the tiers that are there, you can get some swag, you can get some free ebooks, and you can join our Discord community that is already hopping with people dying to discuss the works of Christopher Pike.
Hopefully not literally.
Yeah,
No.
Dying. Literally. Die softly, man. Die softly. They're so loud. So, next time on the PikeCast, we will be reading and reviewing Whisper of Death, which is my book that I think of when I think of Christopher Pike. And I can't wait. So thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Joe. Cassie, Becca, you're awesome. Thank you for doing this with me. And we'll see you in 2 weeks on the PikeCast.
Woo! Bye!
Bye.
You survived the night, friends. You can peek out from under your covers and see the first blues of dawn out the window. Thanks for spending the night with the PikeCast, and we hope you'll join us again next time. Until then, Pikers, pleasant dreams. Welcome, Spectorinos. You're listening to the Spectral Inspector podcast, hosted by Osgood.
Been a while, hasn't it? Your old spectral inspector has been dormant, hibernating. Not by choice, really, though one supposes mental health, physical health, and general malaise does figure in. Mostly I've been dormant because I've had nothing to say. Nothing memorable, nothing mysterious, and with no mystery, what's there to investigate? Well, last night, thankfully, the barest inkling of a mystery dropped into my lap. These 3 snippets of sentences came to me in an email last night. Mazurowski's idea. Rest stop, please. Drumbeats. Find the hinterlands. Zach says that the email came from nowhere. Ooh. Though I imagine that nowhere is far more likely to be an obfuscation technique that he has yet to crack than anything genuinely sinister or spectral. That email led us to Clinton Mazurowski, who hosted Across the Backroads for years under the name The Guardian, of whom I imagine you've heard. I honestly thought he still hosted it, as there's a guy who calls himself The Guardian on there now. The new Guardian, though, is much harder to listen to. Who really wants to hear that paranormal guy talking about his Donald Trump as Jesus theories? Not this gal. So there's that, and a missing report that he wrote called the Rest Stop Papers back in 2006 that even the extensive internet archive can't find. Where does that leave us? Nowhere at the moment, which is why I'm telling you. Zach and I will continue to tug at errant threads, but I do wonder if I'm forcing the mystery, yearning for the investigation. It's hard not to feel like a lost fraud sometimes, Spectorinos. Of course, fraud is in my blood. I'm sure some of you have already heard this before, but please do indulge me as I've had almost no quality sleep, and Mary's bloody Caesar was strong this morning. My family, the Osgoods, were grifters way back. My great-grandfather and mother called themselves the Psychic Osgoods. Lillian and Ernest, for 2 bits or whatever, would bring you into their parlor and call forth your deceased family members from the margins. They'd manifest as a shake of the table or a flicker of the lighting, maybe even an ectoplasmic performance if the Osgoods were feeling clever. They didn't believe a word of what they were saying or doing, of course. Their fraud was a cynical cash grab. They often made the argument that they were bringing peace to those who came to them for guidance. Because aren't imaginary glimpses beyond this life worth some cash if they bring real peace? Religions the world over certainly agree with that, in private if not public. But these are the things that liars, cheats, and frauds say. These are the lies they tell themselves and each other, so they don't feel as though they're taking bread out of hands or shoes off feet. It's not snake oil, but it ain't much better either. I don't want to be a fraud. All I want to do is help, and all I want to feel is that thrill of discovery. Is that too much to ask? Are there so few mysteries to uncover anymore? Then why do we keep searching when it seems there's so little to investigate? When it seems as though mystery has left our lives more and more as data is collated and democratized? Because answers are important, no matter how thin they may be. Because as much as Lillian and Ernest Osgood were liars and cheats, sullying their family, my family, and would have been run out of town by Houdini if he'd ever met them, they still realized what the yearning was, the desire. It's closure. When someone close to you dies, there's a hole in your world. They're just gone. The belief in a ghost or a spirit, one that could answer our questions, could tell us where they left that amazing trinket from our childhood, could tell us they love us still, is the desperate hope that this life isn't the one and only, that it's the prelude to something beyond, a chance for us all to be together again. Call it heaven, call it postscript. That confirmational desire has been omnipresent since the dawn of our species. When we first looked up at the stars and imagined them as people, gods, monsters, we're drawn to the mystery. Whether there is something else, something after, and I believe that there is, that makes it far more likely that there's some truth to the centuries of paranormal stories. Sure, vampires may have just been people suffering from porphyria, their gums receding so teeth appear as fangs. The Earl King snatching children may have been an attempt to deal with the horrors of childhood mortality or infanticide. Our urban legends of the last 100 years, from hook-handed men to alligators in our sewers, right through to Slender Man and creepypasta, are just more evidence of the desire, the desperation to believe in the otherworldly. We couch it in horror and danger because that's easier, somehow. But also, perhaps, because it's difficult to believe that there's just this and nothing. A now and then. The cosmic light switch that turns off when we shuffle off this mortal coil. When you open that door of belief in the afterlife, in ghosts, in the paranormal, and go beyond the Christian dogma of heaven, or at least look deeper within that dogma, you'll find the implication of so much more. Because unless you believe in a literal stairway to heaven with a literal Saint Peter at the top who literally says, "I've got your table ready, sir," when you arrive, you must recognize that the afterlife, that ghosts and spirits and energy are something altogether different. That it implies dimensionality, that it means space between, and mysteries pull us along with them because they cluster, both because a town or a community or society shares its myths, but also because I believe there are spaces in the world that are thin, where the barrier, a membrane between this world and the next, between life and beyond, is thin, and that thin spot seems to attract interest on both sides, from spirits, entities in this world and that space, scratching at the vellum between them. Is that the afterlife? Who knows? I've always called it the margins, a way station between this world and the next, that we move through before we move on. It exists between space, between time, between dimensions. Anyway, I guess, like Maddo, I'll say watch this space. I'll update you when I know more, Spectorinos. This is Osgood, the Spectral Inspector, signing off.
Thanks for listening, Spectorinos. For more from the Spectral Inspector, check out spectralinspector.com. Until next time, sweet dreams.